Good evening and welcome to another edition of Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church's uh, Man Cave podcast. It is October 17 and we are, is it the 16th? October 16th. I'm just ahead of my time. It's October 16 and we have another action-packed, fun-filled topic for this evening. And our topic is the family structure still important today? And so before we introduce our panelists, I just want to remind everybody that we are coming to you from Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio, 3375 S.N. Winston Senior Way, or Pastor S.N. Winston Senior Way, also known as Siebenthaler Avenue, 45406. And so if you are in the area, you are always welcome to join us, 10:30 a.m. on Sundays. And for our panelists this evening, I'd like to start out with an introduction. If you can tell me your name, you could tell me your age, and tell me if you are married or not. And I'll start here to my right, your left. Go ahead and tell us, give us your name.
Trust Chin, 47 years old, and yes, I'm happily married.
Okay.
My name is Joe W. Howard, 75 years of age, and I'm single.
Okay.
Malcolm McClure, 56 of age, and I am happily married.
All right. And again, my name is Damone Scott. I am 52, and I am happily married as well. So we got married, we got single. Do any of you have children?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
All right.
Yes, I do.
You all have children. I do as well. So we all have children. So with our topic today, is the family structure still important today? And so by the family structure, I'm referring to the nuclear family, that father, mother, child in the household unit. So so when I say family structure, that's what I'm referring to. Is that still important today? And the reason that I'm asking is because some people say that it is important, and there are things that need to be done maybe to improve it. And some people say, it's not necessarily as important. That's the past. That's old fashioned. This is a new day. So I'm curious as to you all's opinion when it comes to the family structure. What is your opinion? Do you feel it's still important today, or is that kind of old fashioned?
I think it's still important. When I was growing up, we had Sunday dinners.
Mm-hmm.
During the week, we had family dinners. But on Sundays, everybody knew to be at home at a certain time, because my mother would get stuff ready after we got out of church, and we would have a nice Sunday dinner, and we would sit down and have conversations. You know, how's your day? Or what did you do? How was school? Things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you communicate with your family, you learn the likes and dislikes of one another. You learn the attitude and the mood of one another.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important,
Okay.
because we all need one another.
Do you think that we can still know each other equally as well without that experience?
To an extent, but it's conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have conversations, and you need the sisters, or the brothers or the sisters, and you need the parents,
Mm-hmm.
because my idea might not be the same as my brother's idea, or might not be the same as my sister's idea. But in retrospect, I want to hear those ideas. I want to hear what my parents had to say, or what my parents think, how they feel.
Okay.
Because it's important.
Anybody else?
Just to piggyback, yeah, the thought of family at the dinner table, the household family, who's in that house. I think it's how you're brought up. It's not to say that things don't change and you don't change as things change, but to have in my opinion, a base as you come up. How my mother feels, how my father feels, what is instilled in us. As you get to that certain age, you may say, hey, this doesn't work for me anymore. But at least you have something, in my opinion, to start from. You don't, there's enough of individuals out there with their own ideas and thoughts. And in my opinion, I think you get lost when you don't have somewhere to start from. It doesn't have to, it's not perfect. It wasn't perfect in my home. I had a mother, I had a father. I lost my father, I would say early. I was 16 when I lost my father. But I still believe me growing up 16 years under his house,
Right.
under his authority, it gave me a base. So, as a father, did I get it right? I leave that to my kids. Sometimes, you don't want to say, well, I missed that one. But if how I was groomed and brought up helped with my son and my daughter not getting into a world of trouble, whatever this world brings on you, then I'm quite happy with the outcome. Like I said, it doesn't mean that things don't change and they don't have their own ideas. They do.
Right.
Things change. This social network that we have, you're going to find and take on ideas of folks you don't know. But I go back to, if you have a family and you have those two anchors, a mother and a father, I think you're going to do a little bit better than if you didn't.
Okay. Don Stress?
For me, growing up, there was a base. It wasn't a nucleus where it was a mother, father, a household, but it was always family. There was always male and female influences. The majority of people in my family, they worked. But the one thing we did have was that family get-together, whether it was every Sunday or whether it was every other Sunday or one Sunday out of the month, based on everybody's availability. And you got to hear everybody's ideas. You got to hear everybody's perspectives on different things. Like, we could be talking about politics, and you hear, your uncle thinks one way, your other uncle thinks another way, and your mom thought this way, and your grandmother thought this way, and you got to hear it based off of the eras that they lived in. And, today it's a little different. We don't have that get together like we used to, because everybody has transitioned and moved on. And it's, I guess I would say the pressure for me is to try to figure out how to put that together and establish that and make that another base, for, my kids to be able to say, hey, when we do get together, we do talk, we do have, I do get to hear their ideas and opinions, and which is something that I actually shared with my kids, with my wife, her kids, and we were talking about ideas, and everybody's gonna have a different idea. Y'all not gonna like it, but at least respect it, because that's their idea, that's their perspective, and that's something that
you touched on something, and I was going to ask, and I neglected to ask it at the outset, but I was going to ask, did you grow up with mom and dad, your biological parents, in the same house?
no.
Okay, you say no. What about you?
Yes, I did.
And what about you,
Yes, I did.
Okay, and so my parents divorced when I was between first and second grade. So for the vast majority of my upbringing, my biological mom and dad were not in the same house. I lived with my dad and my stepmother up until the 7th grade, and then I went to live with my mom. So there was a period of time when it was just my dad and my brother and I, and then it was him and my stepmother, and then my brother and I, and she had a son, And then it was just my brother and my mom. So we were kind of in a single family household. So I kind of experienced it from both sides. And I only ask because I think our experiences help to color our opinions about the subject. And our experiences help to shape how we view, whether something is important or not important. And so when it comes to the family, most of our comments seem to kind of cluster around getting together like at meal times. Do you feel that there are any additional benefits to having that family structure, or do you feel that the primary benefit is being together at mealtime?
I think being together in general.
Okay.
It doesn't always have to be a dinner. It could just be a family gathering. But the one thing that I think should not bring us together is a death or a funeral. We should be able to say, hey, let's go over to my cousin's house, see his mother and father. And then my mother and father like, well, I'll be over there later. Just a natural get together. A funeral or death is not something that I would like. It's not the circumstances I would like to come together to be together.
Yeah, certainly shouldn't be the only time we get together.
Exactly.
And all too often it is. Anybody else have a comment? Is it just mealtime getting together? Do you feel like is the big benefit with the family structure? Do you feel like there are other benefits to it?
There's benefits
Yes.
aside from, but I think that's the main benefit. If you have that anchor, and I'll be honest, I'm hearing my panel how they spent a lot of time. It was mandatory. You be at the table, and I can still say it was a short time. 16 years. That's not what I've experienced since. I've had more time at a table from my 20s on than from my youth up until I lost my father. Family time. I've had interactions with other families, and now with my wife and her family, my in-laws, and they're big on that. Where I came from, no, it was mandatory.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I'm glad I was there. I got to eat, and I got to eat.
Eating is
But
good.
for the most part, what I experienced, a little different. I don't blame what went on. Some people. Did I have it hard? No. But as far as the conversation, if I didn't say anything or I didn't hear anything, it's kind of came from, unless you're being talked to, it wasn't that I wasn't allowed to talk, but that kind of was the atmosphere when I was coming up. We didn't actually have a family dinner because my mother worked second shift. My dad would get off first shift. My mom would cook. My dad would come home and finish, and me, my dad, my brother would eat dinner. My mom would actually either eat before she went to work, or she had a meal when she came in.
Yeah.
So the interactions aren't always like the Cosby Show. I seen my mom in the morning. When I got home from school, she was cutting out.
Yeah.
Didn't see my dad in the morning. He came in at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and we interact. And I still believe I had a great family.
Yeah.
It's not me being an introvert, they say introvert, I don't know what word to use. I was antisocial. I didn't go ripping and running, and I pretty much was a mama's boy. And when I lost my father, honestly, I kind of came a little bit up out of my shell. I experienced more things, some things I had no business experiencing, but you grow up. But as far as still being in that household, how things were. Unless you told me it was bad, I didn't know.
Right.
So,
That was
the
the
dynamics.
foundation that you had.
Yes, sir. So,
Dontress, how do you feel?
For me, my grandmother and great grandmothers, they wasn't big on the phone. Their biggest thing was, I need to put eyes on you.
Right.
You know, I need to see you. So if you went 4 or 5 days without seeing them, then you got a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it was always, what's wrong? You don't like your grandma? You don't love your great grandma no more? I ain't seen you. You know, come on and see me. And one story my mom always tell me is that our family wasn't affectionate.
Mm-hmm.
They wasn't the hug and kissy type. But she said, when me and my brother came along, we were. You know, we were the ones that wanted to give everybody hugs before they left or before we left or, you know, went somewhere. And I remember one day I had left, didn't give a hug, didn't say I love you. And my grandmother lived on Midway, and we stayed on Free Pike. So I get home, my mom was like, hey, your grandma got a problem with you. I was like, what? She was like, you walked out that door and didn't say I love you, didn't give her a hug.
oh, wow.
What's the problem?
Wow.
Started looking for it.
Started looking for it. I jumped back on the number 24, went all the way back down to Midway just to give her a hug and tell her I love her. And because it was just, you know, we created something different.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was one of the things I do miss, you know, about our family gatherings and get-togethers is those little small moments.
Yeah. And you don't get those moments without being together. And, you know, Malcolm, you mentioned something that I had thought about earlier in that, you know, in the past, family dynamics were different because to a large extent, you had one parent working and one parent at home. But if you have two parents working, that changes the dynamic, especially if you have somebody, if they're working different shifts, right? And so that's going to color things a little bit differently. And it made me think of with my kids. Now, certainly when they were younger, elementary school, junior high school, there was a time when dinner was going to be on the table. You need to, you know, be back in from playing, have your hands washed, be at the table.
Right.
Once they got into sports more, it shifted the schedule.
Right.
And, you know, somebody's here at practice or somebody's got a game. And then it became a lot more difficult to, on a daily basis, have everybody at the table at dinner time at the same time. Right. And it bothered me because I felt like I was missing out on the opportunity to talk to them about different things, to impart my values to them, to find out what they thought about things, right? Because as they're ripping and running, they're doing things with their friends and they're going here and they're going there, time just kind of goes by. And you don't really get to, you might want to share something, but it's not necessarily the right time. Just sit down, hey, let me sit down and let me tell you what I think about this. And so, but having, you know, being able to get together, whether it's at a meal or whether it's just, you know, family time, I began to schedule family time where it's like, okay, you know what, on this day at this time, we all going to sit down and just catch up with one another, right? It's not even a bad thing to do, even if you don't have kids or when your kids grow up, move away, just to make sure that you and your spouse stay connected and you don't get so busy doing things that you lose track of what each other's doing. But so the family dynamic, the family structure has changed. Do you think it has changed for the better? Do you think it's changed for the worse? Or do you think, it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other?
Well, if you're sitting back, go ahead.
Excuse me. I think it's just the signs of the times,
Mm-hmm.
because now our kids have schedules, we have schedules, and dinner time, McDonald's gets in the way. Churches gets in the way.
let
But they're
me,
convenient.
let me clarify. When I say the family structure, I don't necessarily mean your individual family.
Yeah.
I mean, over the decades, if you look at the family structure, say just nationwide or even at the black community today versus, say, when you were a kid or back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s versus how it is now. Like
Right.
the family has changed a lot. And so looking at the difference between then and now, do you feel like it's better now? Do you think it's changed for the better? Do you think it's changed for the worse? Or it's not, it doesn't really matter?
Well, it leads me back to signs of time, changing times,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone has a schedule now. People still come together for various events and things like that, but now, more so than ever, there's cell phones, so you can call to stay in touch, or you can text to be in touch, or jump in the car, or on the what bus was that?
24.
It's 24, back over there. That's the old school. But those values and things, they're still there. They just sort of been spread out,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
I'm gonna have to say that it's weakened,
Mm-hmm.
and with that, like I said, when we got together, that closeness, that energy, you knew when something was good, or you knew when something wasn't feeling right with somebody. You can't really get that from a text message.
I agree.
Phone calls, you may be able to hear it in their voice, you may not. But when you looking at somebody eye to eye, you know that, okay, you telling me you good, but you really not.
Right.
And for me, I think that's one of the things that is getting lost, along with also when you sitting at the dinner table and you listening to the matriarchs or the men of the house,
Mm-hmm.
and you noticing how everybody's looking and giving them that eye contact and that respect, and they're not interrupting when your grandmother or great-grandmother or grandfather is talking.
Yeah.
Now you sit and you could be in somebody's house and they could be talking and the kid just blurts, and you look over and you just like,
What's that supposed to happen?
what's
Do you see me talking?
like,
Right.
I'm sorry, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah.
So, it's like those little values and things are being lost.
Yeah. A lot of little things that get picked up from interaction, without the interaction, a lot of times they don't get picked up. So, Malcolm, did you have a comment?
I think even with that, to piggyback, it's a change of times.
Yeah.
Where we're comfortable now, what we accept now. I got a 4-year-old granddaughter, joy of my heart, and she comes interrupt. I find myself making excuses for her,
Mm-hmm.
but it's you either dealing with it
That's
the
'cause
way
you a
you dealing
grandfather.
with it. I'm a grandfather.
It's different for granddaddy.
It's-
Granddaddy is supposed to do that.
Yeah, but you still want her to understand.
Right.
I'm talking.
That's what
you
mom
have
and dad
to
come in.
right. And with that dynamic, when those parents of that child aren't around at the time, you do what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
You remember what it was when they were 4-year-old and they didn't have a way, and we got to go do this right away, or she's pulling you one way or pulling you that way. You make adjustments. So things have changed,
Mm-hmm.
and with that, it's what you accepted when you said, okay, could you give me a moment? Let me handle this. When back in the day, it was a finger, it was a look, it was if you don't, and for me it's fine, but when you let that go to a point where you have no control, then yeah, the values, they're lost.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel what was not mandatory, but what was dealt then definitely is not you made the loss of respect because you knew you made that.
What do you think why is there the loss of respect? What happened to it? What caused, how come it didn't get passed on to the next generation?
I don't think it was totally lost. I think in certain families it's definitely still there.
Yeah. Or how did they retain it?
How did they
versus
retain
those
it?
that
Yeah.
lost it?
I think what backing you had, because I look at my in-laws and believe they were wonderful. I look at my mom for as long as she was around, she was wonderful. Well, my mom probably was some of the problem. If you know my son and what he got away with, I'm blaming her. But she loved them. And as long as you love someone, they're going to come back to you. They're going to respect you. They're going to want the most for you. So that's why they do what they're supposed to do. Yes, it gets lost. Don't get me wrong. I got family where you can definitely see it didn't touch everybody. Everybody wasn't touched the same way. You want the most from them, but I look at my brother, and not to compare me to him, but he went a different direction. So when I look at his family, his sons, they didn't get that I got. And I don't want to, who's the worst for it? They are. I look at them now and I see what they've been through and I see what they're going through. I'm not as close to them as I could be. But then how do I interact with what they never knew? They're their own people. They're their own kids. They're their own, individuals. So at times when I have to say something, I have to choose words that will, lighten the load, not be as effective as if I was talking to my son or my daughter.
Right.
And still, even with that, talking to my son and my daughter, I believe they understand. I'm coming from a space that I'm going to give you yours, but understand where I'm coming from. I'm only trying to help you. They're grown now. All of them are grown. But to know what this child went through to what this child went through, everybody didn't have what I feel I had.
Yeah.
I don't believe everybody, every child or every person that came through my door that was attached to my son and my daughter got what I feel we gave to my son and my daughter.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there was ever a time when everybody got, that family unit or what have you. You always had situations where, the family wasn't together, mom and dad weren't together, or they weren't, they just didn't impart any values. They let the kids run wild. But I think there has been a change in that you look at the number of families today where maybe it's just a single head of household.
Yes.
Versus in the past. I think up until the 60s, the early 60s, black folks were the most married group in America. It was a little over 80% of the kids that were born in the black community were born to two-parent families.
Gotcha.
Now it's almost the opposite.
Almost.
Where you have getting close to 80% of them are born to single heads of household. And I feel like that has had a negative effect on us as the black community in a variety of ways. But it's not just a black community issue. It's also had an effect on the nation as a whole, even the majority community. They're grappling with the same issues. It's just because there's so many more of them. It's taken longer for the percentages of their families to get to where ours was. But in the 60s, we were, 20-25% out of wedlock births, where they were maybe like 3 to 5.
Gotcha.
Now we're 75-ish, and they're 30. So it's greatly increased for them as well.
Right.
It's just taken longer.
Gotcha.
And even when you look outside of the United States, if you look at the top 10 countries with out of wedlock births in terms of the percentages, the U.S. actually isn't even in the top 10. And I was surprised, but because generally we kind of think about just our nation.
Yes.
But Chile, 75%, Costa Rica, 72, Mexico, 70, Iceland, 69. Then it goes France, Bulgaria, Norway, Portugal, Slovenia, and Sweden. Sweden is at 55. So these are mostly European.
Gotcha.
And so it's not just in the United States, but it makes me wonder, is there a spiritual component to that? Because the impetus or the motivation for marrying and staying married had a lot to do with our religious values. I think we've gotten away from such a strong adherence to that, not just here in the United States, but Europeans as well. And I'm wondering, is that straying away from, or that lessening of the importance of what thus saith the Lord, do you think that has had an effect on the state of the family today? I know some of these stats I just kind of threw out there, maybe you're just for the first time hearing them, but whether you take the statistics or whether you just kind of take your own experiences, do you think that, well, one, do you think there is a lessening of relying on what thus saith the Lord? And if so, do you think that plays into the state of the family?
Well, me being brought up in the church, and I remember when I was younger, get up, got to go to Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day while I was still young, I woke up and I said, I'll get up and go to church and won't anybody have to tell me to go to church. So I always had that structure with my mother more so than my father.
Mm-hmm.
My father would take us to church on occasions. My mother, she would take us to church, and then it got to be where we would just get up on a Sunday morning and go to church.
Did she go with you, or did she just take you?
There was a period where there was a lull where, she would make sure that we got up and went to church, and she didn't for various reasons. But I always looked forward to going to church.
Mm-hmm.
And then in raising my children, the same way. I instilled the values that she instilled in me into them.
Mm-hmm.
So one day I was looking, and I had came in late from work, and it was Sunday morning, and my son was up bright and early, and he was preparing himself to go to church, and he had his baby sister up, getting her ready, and she was fingers in my eyes like it's too early. But after a while, everybody looked forward to going to church.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just one of those things that we just did.
Okay.
And I enjoy going because I enjoy Sunday school.
So did that play? How did that affect your household? Did the biblical values did the biblical values affect the decisions you made as you raised your kids, as you were married? Did that play a part or not really?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
It had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I never forgot, because I used to have a ferocious temper. I still do. I just learned how to control it. My mother would always remind me, 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Mm-hmm.
Think about your actions, because there are consequences to your actions.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
when my kids would do something and I had to chastise them, I would explain to them, this is the result of what you did. These actions has consequences because of what you did or you should have done.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
I always made a point to explain, what was happening and why it happened.
Dontress, how you feel about that? Did the Bible have much of an impact on, or does it? Because you're still raising kids, right?
Yes.
Okay, so does it have much of an impact on how you raise your kids, or do you teach them very much about what the Word says, or And does that have much of an effect on how you deal with your wife, and just as a family? Does the Bible really play much of a part in how you, as a husband, as a father, make the decisions that you make?
Growing up, and a lot of my family didn't go to church. They believed in God, but they didn't follow any particular religious practice. We had one or two people, one of my uncles was a Muslim, so I went to a mosque, sat, followed that. My stepfather was a Jehovah's Witness, where he practiced, and we ended up going, being a Jehovah's Witness, but I was always drawn just God in general. And I read the Bible, for myself, trying to, learn and gather the information for myself, and started attending, local churches around the city, and just hearing, the different words of how people spoke about God and Jesus. And I've always tried in my life to incorporate those values and principles into my kids, and drop a jewel or nugget here and there from the scripture in a practical sense for them to understand it, and not so much just, well, John 3:16 says, didn't drive it into them like that. I just said, hey, listen, you got to love the Lord, with all your heart, with all your understanding, and that means giving you your all, giving your best, to God, and from that God to do great things for you. And for me, it's just been imperative to try, at my best to emulate the life lessons that I've learned from reading the stories about Jesus and the prophets before him, and trying to, show them this is the life, how you should live, versus trying to live the way the world has.
Malcolm, you come from a nice churchy family, or you in a nice churchy family. So as you raised your kids, and as you are still navigating married life, do you feel like when you're thinking about what you're doing, does the Bible really play much of a part in the decisions that you make?
It does. I'll be honest with me. Everyone has a conscience. And before I even say, oh, what would Jesus do? I think to myself, what am I about to do wrong? Church wasn't big when I was coming up. My parents put us on a church bus, and then went out to Drexel, and we went to this Nazareth church. And I'll be honest, I took in quite a bit. I understood the message that was coming. I even feel like at times what was said, mentioned, taught, I felt I was dealing with something that pertained back to whatever was going on, or what had came from that Sunday. But in general, coming up, there wasn't a lot of church for us. My father, I knew he knew the Bible. I knew my mother knew the Bible. He couldn't pray the way he did over us and not know the Bible. But that's the only little bit I took in.
Yeah.
He wasn't full of scripture. I just know he could pray. I know he knew what he was saying and what he believed in. For me, coming up, it was honestly just conscience. I'm human. I can go this way or I can go that way. And coming up, church became more to me in my 20s because I was invited into this church. I always knew church was good, but what is church? What is going on? Go in that building. What's going on in that building?
Right.
But after pretty much, I'll be honest, after marriage with my wife, that's where it all becomes or has become more to me and what I see, what I take in. So, coming up in my 20s, early 20s now, not so much
Yeah.
back, but it was marrying into the family that I married into. It made a whole lot more sense.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that everybody on the panel really feels that there has been some kind of a change, but that the family structure is still relevant.
I think
And
so.
that from a biblical standpoint, and we talked about imparting values to your children, that it's easier to do that if the family unit is together. And I feel like that with myself. And my kids are now in college. They're 18 and 20. And there's still so much that I still would like to say to them, that I would like to go over with them and to see if they understand. And so, even though they're out of the house, at least during the school year, and they keep finding their way back home on the weekends, but that's okay, because it gives me time to maybe to share and really to set the example for them of what a godly man looks like, for they can see what a godly woman looks like. How does a godly man interact with a godly woman? What does that look like?
Gotcha.
What are our values when it comes to our elderly relatives? Do we just throw them away, they old, or do they see us making the effort to spend time with them, to still show respect for them, et cetera? And it's hard to tell that. It's easier to show it, and I think kids pick up a whole lot more from what we do than what we say. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons that the family unit is important, because just like the Bible says that we're the body of Christ. If the body parts are all separated,
Right.
well, they can't help each other. If the shoulder is hurting, the arm can't hold it. If the arm is somewhere different from the hand, or I should say the hand can't hold it. If the hand is different from somewhere different from the shoulder, he can't hold it, right? And if we're all scattered as a family, then it's harder for those values to be passed on. So, I think it is just important for we as men to be very cognizant of the fact that we do have a responsibility as the heads to impart what is godly to our children. And I think especially today, because there's so many influences today that weren't around when we were growing up. And so they have the opportunity to have more negative things, more worldly things coming into their heads. So I felt like I have to be even more intentional about trying to impart those biblical values. And so as I continue my married journey and continue to try to raise or guide my adult children, and you all do that the same, I'll pray for you all pray for me, that we will do it in a way that is pleasing to God, and that because he really established the family unit. It's not a man-made invention. That's what he came up with. And so, my prayer is that we as men, whether it be men of Mount Calvary, men of Dayton, men of the United States, or just men in this world, but children of God, that we use our position to impart what God wants us to impart to our families. So with that, we will end this session of our ManCave podcast. And if it be God's will, you all can join us back here next month. We will have another fun, exciting topic that is relevant for today. And like I said, if you are in the area, come on by and visit Mount Calvary, or get the autograph from one of these panelists, because now they are celebrities.
That's fun. That's fun.
But tune back in, and we appreciate you tuning in for this one, and we hope that you join us with the next Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church Man Cave podcast. Until then, you all be blessed.